what's up? Ken from Palm Beach Dyno here. We've got an awesome test for you today. We're testing the new TTR CNC carbon fiber intake manifold for the Coyote, GT350, GT500. We're going to be testing it right here on Jimmy's twin turbo Hellion car. It features a Shaun's intake right now, which is awesome. We're also going to be doing some testing versus a Plazmaman intake, and I'm going to sit down and go over all the intakes, plenum volume, runner length, and we're going to do that later. But first, let's baseline the Shaun's intake. We're going to set it up at about 20 pounds of boost, 1200-ish horsepower. This is made over 1300, but we're on the stock engine. Since we're doing multiple pulls, we want some consistency, and I don't want to really lean on the stock engine that hard. So we're going to try for about 1200 horsepower and really look at the power curve more so than just peak power. So let's see what it makes on the Shaun's intake. All right, here we go. We're gonna go ahead and do 2 pulls just to make sure everything's gonna be consistent. All right, pretty consistent, especially for back-to-back pulls. 11 horsepower difference, and really, if you look at the curve, it's exactly the same. It's just a little blip at the top. So this is going to allow us to really tell you how the intake does, and as you can see, it actually spooled up a hair sooner on the second pull because of heat from the turbos, and that's why we're doing 2 pulls. Because if we saw this from the other intake manifold, we might say it was from the manifold. So this will give us a good deal. We'll get the intake manifold swapped over and then do 2 more hits. All very different. If you look at the Plazmaman runner, the shape is different. I bet you these are similar length to the Plazmaman, but the other runner length is not. Well, this is definitely going to be different. Definitely. Runner lengths are very different. The other cool thing is the inside of the Plazmaman, the Shaun's, and the TTR are totally different. The runner design is very different. What we're going to do is we're going to go over these in detail on the table, give you all the measurements at the end of the video for those of you guys that care. But the cool thing is they're definitely different. It's not just carbon version of this intake, so very cool. The whole fucking car is just like it shifted that. You gotta check the tire pressure. All that extra pull. It definitely works. Well, I would say that is undeniably a win right there. Whew. All right, so we'll take the two highest ones, which is 6 and the 2 second pulls, which is interesting. It was the second pull that made more on both, probably from the turbos getting a little happier with some heat in them. I mean, I cannot believe how awesome that is. I mean, that's, as expected, the longer runner is hurting us up top, but I mean, like, not much. This is absolutely amazing. I'm a little bit in shock. Anyway, we're gonna go ahead and get the Plazmaman on, or Jeremy is, and I'm gonna help him, and then we'll see how it does. Now, we're going to an even shorter runner than the Shaun's, so it might be interesting to see what we wind up with. Well, the Plazmaman intake is on. I hope you guys are enjoying this video. Please subscribe, like it, share it with your friends. This is a tremendous amount of work. That's why you don't see it happen a lot. If we get a lot of likes on this video, we'll keep doing product testing for you. Maybe an NA intake shootout. Anyway, let's see what the Plazmaman makes. All right, here's all three graphs laid over top of each other. At first glance, they're all very close. And of course, you know, there's only so much you can do. But the interesting part here is we can identify differences in the power curve and directly correlate those to the design of the intake manifold. For all you techies, we're going to be doing that at the end of the video. Other than just throwing intakes on, testing them, and that's it, now we can learn from this and decide what runner shape, what runner length, plenum volume, all those sorts of things lend to the power curve. So this will be Plazmaman versus TTR, because we're ultimately testing the TTR intake. As you can see, very, very close. In fact, practically identical. We have the same boost curve for the most part. I mean, we're talking decimals difference. Now, you're gonna get a nice big bump in torque. When I say big, I mean we're okay, yeah, right at this spot, 819 torque on the Plazmaman and 842. So that's, what is that? That's 20, 23, something like that. And the horsepower, we're talking about 23. So, is this important? Well, yeah, probably. Now, I was talking to a real known racer about these intake manifolds and the differences. And the differences are only going to apply to certain people. If you have an all-out race car with a perfectly set up torque converter and you can manipulate all those sorts of things, launch RPM, launch at the perfect RPM, then these small differences might not make a huge deal. But say on a GT500 where you've got the DCT transmission, you know, you don't have a torque converter to make up differences and to shift the power band, you can really see a big improvement. You know, the power is going to come in sooner. If you're roll racing, it's going to hit earlier, things like that. Okay, now this is the Shaun's versus the Plazmaman. The results here are a little bit more significant, and it's not a surprise after looking at the intake. I'm a Plazmaman guy, so I haven't had a lot of experience with Shaun's. I've tuned them on plenty of cars, but I haven't had one off of the vehicle. And this matches up exactly with what I see in the intake design, which we'll go over later. But the results, if you look at peak power, you know, we're talking 10 horsepower for the Plazmaman, but realistically, they're both peaking up top, and they're both pretty close up top. But if we look at any in particular spot, it's a lot more significant. There we're talking about 27 horsepower. I got to get really good at this simple math in my head. 27 horsepower, and then you see the torque difference. The interesting part though is the Plazmaman beats the Shaun's pretty much everywhere. There's no trade-off whatsoever. I mean, I guess the Plazmaman might be fading a little bit up top as compared to the Shaun's, but I don't really think so. We're spinning this thing to a high RPM already. You know, for an all-out race car, we might spin 9 to 10,000 RPM, but this is going to cover most of you guys. So you might ask which intake I would pick. So looking at this power curve in the power band, the Plazmaman is similar. So it really comes down to preference. Do you love carbon fiber? The looks of it, the fit and finish, all those sorts of things are going to come into play here. Now, I don't really like to pit companies versus each other, but the answer of Shaun's versus Plazmaman is fairly clear to me here. I'm sure Shaun's is a great company. It's a great intake manifold. There's lots of fast cars with it, but when you consider price, it's really no competition. The Plazmaman is at least $1,000 cheaper, I believe. I think you can get a Plazmaman for $3,600, $3,700, and a Shaun's at retail at least is $4,900 or $5,000, which is very close to the TTR. Now, let's look at the TTR versus the Shaun's. For those of you that prefer the type of plenum that's on the TTR and the Shaun's, because it looks very different than the Plazmaman. As you can see, the TTR, like the Plazmaman, has a big advantage. If we had done the dyno pull slightly higher, I guarantee the Shaun's would be up significantly above 8,200, but they're pretty even at 8,200. And the whole way, again, the Shaun's is up. One spot here, as you can see as an example, you're talking about 36 horsepower. That's a lot. You're talking the same boost, same everything. 36 horsepower is a pound of boost or maybe a little bit more on most vehicles. Now, one question another racer had asked me when I was discussing these results in private was, why not just add a pound of boost? Well, you certainly could do that, but a lot of the times we're already operating at the top end of how much boost we want to run, the turbochargers that are on the vehicle, things like that. So why not make things more efficient and run the extra pound of boost if you have it? That's the way I look at it. So let's get into the details. We're going to sit down and go over these intake manifolds in great detail. All right, for those of you guys that have stuck with us, it's time to dig into some details and see what's behind those dyno numbers. We're going to compare the intake manifolds on a few different metrics and see what determine the power, and also we're going to weigh them, and we're going to do that first. So first up, everybody probably wants to see what the carbon fiber intake weighs, so we'll start with that one. This one's made by TTR, comes out of Dubai. Looks like we're at 21.75 roughly on the weight. Next up is the Plazmaman. This one comes out of Australia. We were probably one of the first people to get these for a Coyote. I actually just saw a memory on one of the social media sites 5 years ago today. We had 4 of these on the way to us. This is one of them, actually. Oh, I better not lean on it. 27.9 pounds, 27.9 on this one. And the Shaun's. This one is also out of Australia. $27 even, which is probably what I would expect from similar sized intakes, both 100% billet. They do have different throttle bodies on them. And I did want to point that out. In the testing, as you can see, these are the throttle bodies that all intakes were tested on, and they're all different. And part of that has to do with what we had available to bolt to the manifold. And I know some of you might think that threw off the results, but in this configuration, it's not going to make a difference. And that's kind of proven by the intake that actually was a little bit lower than the other two, had a 108 millimeter throttle body. This is a stock GT 500 throttle body, and this is a stock Mustang GT throttle body, the smallest throttle body out of the 3, and this one arguably made the best power curve overall, although it was very close to the Plazmaman. All right, next up, we're gonna measure the volume of these intakes. I was gonna do plenum volume, but with the way the intakes were made, that'll be a little difficult. The runners are all fairly similar, so I'm just going to measure the volume of the entire intake manifold and compare that. And we're also going to compare runner length, runner shape, which I think is key here when comparing these intakes. We're going to do that at the end. And also the entry into the runner. We'll take the front off of each intake, take a closer look, and if possible, I'm going to shove some clay down in there and measure the top of the runner so we can see the cross section of the inlet of the runner comparatively across them. But first, let's fill them up with some water. All set up. What we're going to do is I've got a 4-liter container here, and we're just going to fill it up until we get right up to the injector hole, and we'll call that the volume of the entire intake. For those of you that want to guess, this is 4 liters. You can see the intake manifold here. How big is this intake going to be in liters? So we'll go ahead and start filling it up while you guys get your guesses in at on the comments. Oops, I just spilled a little. Now, this isn't going to be super accurate, but it's going to give us an idea. Also, keep in mind, you know, we're just trying to make sense of the dyno numbers. The numbers are the numbers. But a lot of this stuff goes into designing an intake like plenum volume. Is it really that important? You'll get a lot of people that say it's not. I mean, it's important to a certain extent, but any differences between these intake manifolds, many people will argue that it really doesn't matter. The general rule of thumb, from what I've gathered talking to people and doing some searching online, is plenum volume should be 2 to 2.5 times engine displacement for this application. So that would put us anywhere between, you know, 10 to, you know, 12, 13 liters. So we're at exactly 1 liter. So we're at, what are we at? We're at 11 liters because it was 2 times 4, 8, and then 3, so 11 liters. I'm gonna go ahead and get this one emptied out and we'll do the Plazmaman next. All right, all set up with the Plazmaman. I hope you guys are enjoying this tech stuff. It's a little bit of a pain. I'm making a mess with water, but I'm curious, so I hope you guys are too. Okay, that's right up to the holes. And look at that. It's almost identical. Now keep in mind, guys, that you know, this is not exact, but let's just call them exactly the same. Next up is the Shaun's. All right, that's within a little bit of the top. We'll call that good. So we're gonna say 12, 11, and 11. Again, this isn't super accurate, but it gives you an idea. This one's slightly larger, but that's not where the big difference is. The difference is in the runners. So we're gonna set up and show you that now. We're gonna start with the flanges and then work our way to the inside of it, the inlet, and also the cross section, which is very important. All right, we've got all the intakes turned upside down. We're gonna take a look at the flange design. They're very different, and also take a look down into the runners. So I've got this flashlight here. I'm gonna go ahead and do this with my phone so you guys can see up close. All right, so now, as you can see, if you look from the side, the injector spot here is very laid back. So it helps get a better run at the flange. And then there you can see down into the plenum. Very, very nice. It's also very, very nice on the inlet, the approach, and we'll show you that once we get the intake further apart. This is the Shaun's, and here you can see it's very different as far as how the injector interferes with the port. There's the TTR, there's the Shaun's. And we'll go ahead and look down in there. Very similar, but one thing you're going to notice, look at how big the inside of that is. It transitions to a round inlet, and it's very tapered. We'll go over that next, but first let's look at the Plazmaman. The Plazmaman is somewhat similar to the TTR. Let's look at it from that angle there, this angle, and then this angle. So the TTR has a little bump right there, which I'm not sure why that's there. Maybe there's a good reason. I'm not an engineer, guys. I am just showing you what I see. And then we'll look at the, now as you can see there, compared to the Shaun's, this runner is pretty much the same size throughout. And that holds true also for the TTR, at least similar shape and all that. One other thing to look at is not only the length of the runner, which we're going to look at very soon, but it's the shape of the runner. If you look at these intakes, they're very different. The Plazmaman is pretty similar throughout the length of the runner. What we'll do is we'll look at it like this. So at the very top, as it meets the plenum, you're talking, do it one more time, 46 to 47 millimeters. The TTR, I'll measure this one so you can see. Very similar, 46. Now here on the Shaun's, it's much, much bigger. We're talking 55 millimeters. So we're 10 millimeters wide here on the Shaun's versus this. So now after looking at the dyno graphs, you may have thought that Shaun's had the shortest runners because it struggled a little bit down low as compared to these. But this runner is much longer than this runner. But the taper, I think, is key. Next up, we're going to look at the inside of the intake and see the entry into the runner. They're very, very different. All right, look at that. Okay, as you can see there, the Plazmaman has a radius, but for the most part, it's rectangular and very similar shape to the runner. All right, now on the Shaun's, you can see the inlet to the runner is humongous, very, very big. And this has an effect when you're comparing runner lengths. You can't compare runner lengths only. Now let's look at this one, and then we'll look at the Plazmaman again. Very, very different. Now, the TTR is even more different. The TTR has an inside bell that looks very purposeful. The shape of it, this intake looks very engineered. Lots of little things I'm noticing. The details do matter. Obviously, this one did slightly better than the rest, and that may get amplified at higher horsepower. Okay, as you can see, the Shaun's has a much larger opening, and that's because of the taper on the runner. They're also transitioning to a round inlet, whereas both of the intakes on either side keep the rectangular style port all the way up. Now, I wanted to get a good feel for the actual size of the inlet, so I sent Kobe after some Play-Doh, and we'll see if this works. I'm going to shove this down into the intake runner and try to get an impression of the size of the inlet. Of course, not exact, but this is going to give us a good idea. I'm going to place this down, and I have enough Play-Doh to do an impression of each one. All right, next up is the Shaun's. I might need more Play-Doh. There's all three molds, and they look very different. I'll go ahead and give you a closer look with my cell phone. And then we'll go ahead and measure them too. It looks like the Plazmaman is the smallest at the opening. We're going to go ahead and measure the dimensions of the runner at the top. We're talking about 61 millimeters. This one is 64 millimeters. And the Plazmaman is about 64 millimeters. Now where they differ is going to be in this dimension a lot. We're talking 36 millimeters and the Shaun's 52 millimeters there. Check that one more time, make sure I'm right. So 36 and 52, and it looks like the TTR is somewhere in between. We're at 44 millimeters. So another very interesting detail here. I'll get you an even closer look. So there is the, I'm sure I'm in focus, or go over here. This is the Shaun's, this is the Plazmaman. And remember, the Shaun's in general was a little bit lower than the rest. And I think that's because it's effectively giving it a much shorter runner due to the taper. And then up top, the Shaun's really picked up. And then here is the TTR versus the Plazmaman. Very, very interesting. Let's measure those runners finally. Okay, the Plazmaman is 3 3/4 inches. The Shaun's is 4 1/2 inches. And the TTR is we'll call that 5 3/4 inches. Now remember, we'll go back to the dyno graphs. The Plazmaman at 3 3/4 and the TTR at 5 3/4 outperformed this one, which is right in between runner length. But I believe the Shaun's is at a slight disadvantage, at least in this test, because of the tapered runner. Now, keep in mind, this is going to be a completely different result if you're running it on a different RPM engine, different power, all those sorts of things. But most of you guys out there are somewhere probably between 1100 and 1600 horsepower. So at 1200 horsepower, we're at the lower end of that spectrum. We'll try and do some testing on a higher horsepower car. I've had lots of people volunteer for that. But for the most part, I believe you can't really go wrong with any of these intakes. The Shaun's is going to be your choice for real high RPM, although the Plazmaman seems to perform similarly, but does better down low. The TTR overall is the best intake, at least according to my tests, but super close to the Plazmaman. I will tell you that this intake manifold is going to be $49.99. Nobody has one out there right now, at least in the United States, as far as I know. We're going to do a group buy to get these out the door. A lot of people ask about durability, so we'll go ahead and address the elephant in the room. We don't really know, but carbon fiber manifolds have had issues in the past on other platforms, but this one differs greatly. There's no glue on the runner. This bell design, it's sandwiched in there, so you should have no problems. Same thing with this flange here and in here. It has, these both have screws. They come from the inside. This has, it's sandwiched in there. It's not reliant on the glue, so there is going to be a warranty on this intake. We're too early to be talking about that right now, but any way you go, I think you're going to be awesome. Well, since we're calling this an intake shootout, we have to declare a winner. That makes it very, very difficult because they are very different. After analyzing the different manifolds, I can really appreciate the hard work and effort that goes into this by all companies. And I can also see that they're very different, which means they all put their own work into this. They're not just copying it and trying to sell something cheaper or things like that. That's the most exciting thing to me. As far as the winner, well, if you're going purely off horsepower, the TTR has to take it. It comes in a little bit better down low, makes just a little bit more in the mid-range and the meat of the power band. But if you're talking straight value, maybe the Plazmaman is a good choice because it is the least expensive intake manifold in the Shootout. Let's go over that real quick. I believe the Plazmaman, depending on options, the Plazmaman burst panel is an option, whereas on the TTR, it's not an option. With this, you're in the mid to upper 3,000 range. The TTR is $49.99, but we're gonna do $500 off for the group buy. The Shaun's retail is in the $49,000-$5,000 range. Of course, there's often deals on this intake, probably because it's decently more expensive than the Plazmaman, its direct competitor, but a great intake. They obviously look very different. Looks are important. If you're a carbon guy, obviously this is the way to go. Billet-wise, this is obviously similar to this. The Plazmaman kind of stands on its own as far as looks, and to me, it's very sexy. But I am a carbon guy, so when my twin turbo 680 car comes back out that's already been 760s that had this intake on it, what intake will be on it? Well, subscribe to the channel and find out. I hope you liked the video, share it with your friends, and we'll see you on the next one.